we go. He is right. He is right. If you're patient with your assets, if you're patient with your gold, with your Bitcoin, with your silver. Ayva l'seicher means it's, don't worry, it's going up. I was speaking to my Rebbe yesterday. He's like, Moshe Chaim, silver, coins, silver coins. These are things, you just wait, my friends. You be patient with things. So what Warren is saying is, there's a truth to that, but because the Nefesh Bahamas, the animal soul inside of a person is so impulsive and wants to see essentially immediate results, it can't understand. And this is all what the Gemara says, that there was a person who was planting a carob tree. You know the Gemara? He was planting a carob tree. And somebody came over to him and said, "You old fool! You know how long it takes this carob tree to grow? 70 years. You're never gonna eat from the fruits." So he looks at this young whippersnapper and he says, "Yeah, you know the carob tree that I'm eating lunch from right now? That was only because somebody planted it 70 years ago that I'm now eating from it. So I'm planting this one because there'll be carob for my children." So when a person is, first of all, that's a very deep Gemara, because it's not only saying that you should think long term, but it means you should think long, beyond your lifetime. It means, what are you planting now for your future generations? What are you, and that's obviously talking about Torah and mitzvahs, children. Many people are deciding, I don't want to have children because, what a pain on my career. Like, how far behind I'm going to fall on my moving forward in the world if I have kids? They're just a drag. They take up so much time. You're so much more inefficient when you've got kids. I could streamline my life, no kids, 1.2 dogs, and I'm good to go. So what kind of strategy is that? That's not a strategy. And so that's what Warren's saying, is that everybody is so impulsive. They're not making long-term strategies for assets. Long-term meaning this life and the world to come. All these Gemaras are about having long-term strategy, investment. You understand that? This is all this. Talking about the world to come, talking about future generations, talking about what's going to be, and not getting caught up with the animal soul, which is just impulsive. And he has to do something which is going to be for me right now. Even though in the future, it's not going to be good for you. Look inside. We're in the Gemara in Sadi Aleph Amud Beis. I want to see another Gemara today, just in the few minutes we have left. It starts with Chizda. It is in the wide lines. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down the wide lines. 4 words from the end of the line. You see it? Rav Chizda Rami Ksiv. I'm going to have the spot on the Gemara. Okay, beautiful. In Sadi Aleph, 91b. 5 lines down in the wide lines, 4 words from the end of the line. Rav Chizda Rami. Rav Chizda Rami means he asked the kasha. Ra means he threw it up. He threw these two things up to Shemayim, and they're clashing into each other. Rami is a classic. He threw these two concepts up, and he's going to see how they fight out in more of a spiritual dimension. How can you rectify these two ideas? So Ksiv, he's quoting a verse from the prophet Isaiah, Chaf Daled, Chaf Gimel, 24, 23. So says the verse, the Chafra Halavana, we're speaking about the Messianic era, and these are verses from the prophet about what things are going to look like, okay? We're getting a window today into the Messianic era. The Chafra Halavana, and the moon will have a certain amount of embarrassment. Uboisha Hachama, and the sun will also be embarrassed. Now we obviously are not talking about a physical embarrassment, like this, like the moon's going to be like, This is conceptual. Ki molach Hashem tzavakos, and the rest of the verse says, Bahar Tzion b'Yushalayim. For the King God, Master of the legions, He is on the Mount of Zion in Yerushalayim. Meaning, God will reveal Himself as the Master of the legions, i.e., the sole Master, and as opposed to any other powers. And with that, the sun and the moon are going to be embarrassed. Okay? What does that mean, they're going to be embarrassed? We're going to explain in a moment. Just so you know, Rashi, on the verse in Isaiah, comments, what is it referring to that the sun and the moon are going to be embarrassed? Says Rashi, the ones who worship the sun and the moon are going to be embarrassed when God reveals Himself on that day and His power goes forth from Zion and Yerushalayim. Those who made that horrible mistake to put all their cards in the gods of the sun and the moon and all the other lowercase gods, that is going to be a very embarrassing day. Like talk about investments. Bad investment. Wrong decision, my friends. That's, by the way, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that those types of investments are very short-term investments. Any type of idol worship is pulling strings to get something you want now. Any types of real hardcore idol worship and things that are totally forbidden, of going to different spirits and shamanistic practices that are directly communicating and asking from different forces, which is totally forbidden, is basically like trying to make short-term gains, but long-term you're going to have a recession. Long-term is going to be, it's basically like money printing. Just you're going to print as much money as possible. You're going to rely on the fiat system, and then everything's going to crash. So here, exactly. So go to Bitcoin instead. That is definitely a good idea. That sounds a very good idea, as well as gold and silver, my friends. Assets, physical assets. The world will go back to a gold standard as well. Keep that in mind, okay? Everybody knows that the most powerful nations of the world are always sitting on gold. Thousands of tons of gold. That is a reality. It's a store of wealth. Okay, and it's long term. As opposed to what we're talking about here, going and having idol worship, is I want a quick fix. If I push these buttons, I might become rich fast. I might get things that I want really quickly. If I do a certain rain dance, I'm going to appeal to the forces and the spirits, as opposed to going right to God. And that might take longer. But in the end, it will have been the right way to do it. And you'll become transformed through it. And you'll build your belief in God in a much more real way, as opposed to going to God's ministers, which is how idol worship began, was that if God gives power to the sun and the moon, it doesn't mean the physical sun. It means the spirits behind the sun and the moon. And He gives the powers of the lions and the powers of the animal spirits. And He gives them power. Then why can't I go to them to get what I need? If you live in a place that needs water, why can't I appeal to the rain gods? Wouldn't that make sense? I need the rain. And God did give a power to the rain. There's forces, the winds, or the sun, which we find in ancient cultures, is appealing to those forces and those gods. Why would I not go to them? Didn't God give them power? That was the original thoughts of idol worship. The answer is, God set up a system where He said, I know that I gave them power, but I always want you to come back to me, to the source. And it seems that one of the reasons why the people started to go to idol worshiping practices was because they said, this is a very deep point, who am I to go right to the king? It's easier for me to ask the ministers. Besides the fact, is it not an honor to the king when I honor the ministers? You could see where this has a certain, you could rationalize a way of starting to develop a culture of going to the rain gods and appealing to them. And that's going to ultimately be an appeal to the king, and then eventually, of course, they forget the king. Because when you make enough inside jobs with the minister, so it's like, becomes a whole thing. And then the minister is seen as like, I don't even need to know about the king anymore. We're doing our own private stuff. And God has warned us time and time again, thousands of years, always come to the source. Always come to me, to the source. So that's the first pshat. I just explained the pshat in Rashi on the pasuk in Isaiah, that the sun and the moon are getting embarrassed. That means those who made investments in the sun and the moon gods, when God finally shines his light completely in the Messianic era, they're going to be embarrassed. That's not like a little embarrassment. That's like an epic, biblical level, prophetic embarrassment, end of days embarrassment. So stay away from that one, from anyone around the world. Stay away from that level of sun and moon or any idol worship embarrassment that the prophet is warning us about. That's verse number 1. Uksiv. And we have another verse. And look, we're going to see a contradiction in the verses. So listen carefully. Uksiv. And it says also in the prophet Isaiah, now it is chapter 30, verse 26, V'haya or halavana, and it will be the light of the moon, ka'orachama. You've probably heard this idea before, that in the end of days, that the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. That it used to be, as Shnei ha'ma'oros ha'gedolim, that God had the sun and the moon with the same power, and then he reduced the power of the moon. And now the moon reflects the light of the sun. And it will be, v'haya, and it will be, the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. And the light, the or hachama, and the light of the sun, yeshivosayim, will be 7 times 7 times ka'or shivas hayomim. 7 times 7, the power of the 7 days of the week of sun. So do a quick calculation there. The light of the sun in the time to come will be 7 times 7 is 49.
345.
343. 343 times the light of the sun now. Could you imagine the sun is twice as bright? What would happen? What about 3 times as bright? By the way, this is also allegorical as well. It's coming to teach a lesson as well. It does say that the light in the end of days will be so bright that God will take it out of its sheath. Right now the sun is in some type of a sheath, whether you call it an ozone layer, whatever you call it. There's a sheath, protection, that people don't burn up. But in the time to come, God will remove the sheath and the sun will shine its full brilliance. And those who are righteous will be healed, and those that aren't will be, we won't say. It'll get hot.
You're saying that God's going to circumcise the earth, he's going to remove the...
Yeah, there's going to be a level of circumcision. Will circumcise the sun, to be exact. Sun, you circumcise the sun, your son. He's gonna take off the outer layer, and the sun is going to shine forth in all of its brilliance. Okay.
Are we going to need sunglasses?
We're going to need a lot more than sunglasses. The only thing that's going to save a person is their mitzvahs. Because your mitzvahs are called your clothing. And the mitzvahs are what let a person, when the light gets very strong, the mitzvahs are going to allow a person to basically absorb it without... Light is always a metaphor for God, energy, and relationship, and Just like we say someone has a lot of light on their face, they're shining. It's always a metaphor. When we talk about God's light, we mean that He's going to shine Himself to us. He's going to radiate a warmth, a goodness, a blessing. Okay? He's going to radiate this love towards us. Now, if a person doesn't have the ability to handle that, that could actually be something that they can't deal with. For example, if you have a really loving person, but a person doesn't, like, he had a very traumatic youth, he doesn't know how to handle love, he had very abusive people in his life, and someone is actually really trying to be good to them, he might freak out from that because he doesn't know how to actually handle that much warmth, that much love. He doesn't have the vessels for it. In our day and age, there's a lot of emotional problems that people can't handle that love and that light. So they don't have vessels, they don't know what to do with it, they just freak out. So the mitzvahs are creating vessels that when God shines that light, that we're going to actually be able to handle that level of intimacy, that level of, like, you know, it's not godly intimacy. That's good. That's very intense. We want to have an ability to deal with that. So that's what it's really talking about in the time to come, that the moon will become bright like the sun, and the sun's going to be 7 times 7 times the 7 days, 343 times, which is another way of saying there's going to be a lot of God radiance beaming into the world. Okay, we mentioned 2 verses right now from the prophet. Right now we're learning Tanakh. We mentioned the first verse that said, in the time to come, what's going to happen? The sun and the moon, the light of the sun and moon are going to be embarrassed because the light of God is going to shine so bright that the light of the sun and moon are going to be embarrassed. Now we said either that means people that worship the sun and the moon, or it actually means that the light of the sun and the moon is going to be like it's going to be like black in the sky. God's light is going to be so strong that the sun is going to look like a black dot in the sky. Because God's light is going to be so big on that day. And then we said that in the time to come, the light is going to be so strong that it's going to be like 343 suns. So is the light of the sun and the moon going to get stronger when Mashiach comes? Or is it going to be eclipsed from God's light? You see, it's a seeming contradiction in the verses. This is like the bread and butter of yeshivas. It seems like a contradiction, but lo and behold, it's not. But everyone hear the contradiction before we save the day with the answer? You guys hear the contradiction? Yeah? Say back the contradiction.
Is it going to, the sun and the moon going to get smaller in front of God's light, or is it going to be greater or more beautiful?
Beautiful. The first verse says they're going to be embarrassed. They're going to be like so dark compared to the light of God as it shines forth in the days to come. That compared to the sun, that God's light compared to the sun and the moon are going to be like, whoa, that's a lot of light. Like, I thought I was like a big shot here, me sun man, but compared to where I get my light from, I'm nobody. First verse. Second verse, sun and moon will be so great that the moon's going to be like the sun's going to be 343 times as bright. It's going to be so much light. Contradiction, right? Is the sun and the moon going to get brighter, or is it going to be embarrassed that it's so pale and it's so dark compared to the light of God Himself? Says the Gemara, like Hasha, it's not a contradiction. We love that. Like Hasha, not a contradiction. Kan liyamais Mashiach, kan la'olam haba. We're going to see 2 answers. Answer number 1. One of these verses is talking about the days of Mashiach, and one of the verses is talking about the world to come, the everlasting reality of humanity, those that are coming on this long, long journey ahead. The first verse, it's talking about that the sun and the moon are going to look very, very pale. Is talking about what? Is talking about now, the times that the sun and moon is going to be pale is talking about the world to come. The time the sun and moon are going to be very bright is talking about the times of Mashiach. Let's explain. In the times of Mashiach, the sun and the moon are going to get so bright that you're going to see this brilliant light. You're going to see God's light starting to shine into the world. It's going to be very, very brilliant. It's also referring to the light of the tzaddikim, to the righteous ones. But in the time to come, and it appears here that we're going to have suns and moons, by the way. Suns and moons in the times of Mashiach. Well, at least a sun and a moon are solar systems of planet Earth, sun and moon. That it's going to get very, very bright. God's going to take them out of the sheath, and there's going to be this glow. But when we're talking about that it's going to be eclipsed, that the sun and the moon are going to be embarrassed, that's the world to come, where God's light is going to be so strong, talking about the light of the Shekhinah, that the divine presence is going to radiate with so much brilliance that there won't even be a sun and a moon anymore. You won't be able to distinguish. That world is not from this world. Which you see another thing from this Gemara. The world of Mashiach looks very much like this world. There's a sun, there's a moon, like we're going to see. There's going to be Bitcoin. There's going to be a world like we know it. There's going to be countries. There's going to be existence here. It's just that God's light coming through the sun and the moon, which is also, you're going to see that the sun and the moon, they didn't have power of themselves. They were representatives of God. That God was shining through them, but you're going to see more brilliance. The times of Mashiach is going to be a wondrous time. But compared to the world to come, it's going to be completely eclipsed by the light of God. Look how much beauty is in a single Gemara. Let's continue to learn Hashem's Torah now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
Have a wonderful day, Chevra.